You have a beard, sort of.
What's going on, guys? The NBA betting market video for January the 15th, 2021. Fat guy. Let's start off with the Magic's Celtics against the spread. Celtics opened up as 3-point favorites. They've been bet down to 2.5-point favorites. 54% of bettors and 45% of the money is on the Celtics. However, the money line is a lot more interesting. The Celtics open minus 157. They've been bet down to minus 141. They've only received 21% of bets on the money line, which makes sense, but they have received 89% of the money on the money line, which doesn't make sense considering this line has moved against them. So what do you think about this market?
21% doesn't make sense either. I mean, considering it's a minus 141. If it was like 52-48, I could understand. I can get behind that. 60-40, I can get that as well, but not 21% and 89% of the money. So even though there is more money on the Magic in the ATS, I would imagine that they're still taking exposure on the Celtics. I mean, we don't know the split between the 794 volume bets and the money, obviously. Like the handle could be larger for the spread and the money line. I would imagine that it is, but this is pretty lopsided. So it is possible that they're taking exposure on the Celtics. But then that would make this a reverse line movement in -3 to -2.5. So, if you have, even though they have less money ATS and this seems like a lateral move, this money line is confusing me. So it's a little bit interesting to take going forward. So then we have to ask ourselves this question: is the spread market that much bigger than the money market? It would be so much easier if we had the handle, and I would happily pay for that information, but we just don't at that time. So if anything, we could posit the theory that it is possible there is just so much more money on the spread market rather than the money line. So the money line on the Celtics is probably balanced by the money that's on the Magic ATS. So that 55% might be of a larger total, larger handle than the money line is. It's the only thing I can kind of glean from that.
And then the OU market, it opened at 213. It's been bet up to 214. 54% of bettors are on the under. However, 70% of the money is on the over.
Well, that would make sense considering the line movement, but this is a pretty small one because I mean it dropped 5 points in juice and went up 1 point in actual total numbers. We're noticing though that we do have access to whole and half numbers now. There's some new technological advancements at the Big Ryan the Fat Guy Studios. So yeah, the this does seem like a lateral movement, but we don't know the value of a point at 213 to 214, so it could be lateral because maybe 5 points of juice is even worth just 213 to 214, so it's just a lateral move. We'll have to see. It does make sense that maybe they're bracing themselves for an influx of over bets because this is an early market and the bets will be flowing in later on. So I would imagine that they would mostly be on the over as well. So maybe just moving it a point is going to help their cause a little bit. -104 though, that's the part that seems interesting. Why not just move it to 214 -106? There must be a reason that I don't know.
On to the next game, which is the Knicks Cavs. 1,097 bets. The Cavs open as 2.5-point underdogs at home. They've been bet down to 2-point dogs. However, the juice has been heavy on the Knicks side, so it's actually a bigger move than it looks like there.
Yeah.
30% of the bets have been on the Cavs as underdogs at home. 80% of the money, though, has helped push that line and the juice down in the Cavs' favor.
It was not. I think what's bigger than the half point is the +104 to -109. You got to realize like your win rate on that goes from like what 48% to break even to 52.1 maybe.
Yeah.
So I mean that's a 5% gap in win probability, which is you're gonna say it's just 5%. It's massive. That is massive. So that's interesting. And concurrently, the Cavs money line has dipped pretty hard here because maybe these are early bum lines, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are you gonna really put out a bum line on the Knicks? It's not like they've been exactly a good team. And I don't even think they're good ATS. Not that I just from the top of my head. So this is interesting that they'd come out with that. And then do you see do you have the opening time on that game, Big Rye?
Let me take a look. We're looking at the Knicks Cavs game. This line came out. The against the spread line came out 10 a.m. for us Pacific time, and sorry, 10 a.m. Eastern time. Let me just check
So
what
7 a.m. Pacific today.
Yeah.
So this isn't an early, like this is a today line. So that's really strange to me, and that they would open like that, because I would almost expect, it's not that the Cavaliers are gangbusters; they're still dogs to the Knicks. I mean, how good can they be? But I don't know. Interesting stuff on an early market. I want to see how the Cavaliers perform this evening. It would be something to keep an eye on.
Fat Guy, can you run over the OU line? I'm trying to just find some stuff here to add.
So
to
the
this
OU
Knicks
here,
game.
it opened at 197.5, minus 103. It has been bet down to 197, but the juice is up to 107. So you could make an inference that perhaps the juice moving from 103 to 104 is perhaps a lateral movement, in line movement, because it's 197.5 to 197. Most of the money is on the over, as you will tend to notice in most of the markets. I would say 60-40 do have lopsided money on the over, as that tends to be a Joe trait. So this is a lateral movement. I feel like the books are they're going to make a little bit of money, just weighting it so that there's more people on the over. That must be the strategy, because realistically, couldn't they just move it 3 points and open at 205.5 or 200.5, and then just get 50-50 each side? Anyways, we're gonna have to see how these markets mature. We are tracking all the line movements and the closing, so we're gonna have a really good picture if we put in some dirty work at the end of this season.
Well, I want to go over something that was talked about in the Big Ryan the Fat Guy Discord, which is part of the YouTube membership. If you guys are interested in having open communication with us 24/7, click join below. But what was talked about in the Discord today was that this OU is ridiculously low. I can't remember an OU being below 200 this year. I'm just looking at some of the bet analytics that we track, and 10%, only 10% of games have finished with less than 197 points. Actually, to go under 197, it's been 9.36, I believe. So it's a 90% of games finish above this 197. So this is definitely an outlier when it comes to setting an OU, and a lot of the public and the money both on the over. So this is a very interesting market that you could track. I can't remember off the top of my head what the NFL equivalent is. It doesn't really matter, but that is interesting to see. And then
hold on one second. I just want to touch on that. Part of the reason is the average team scoring for both of these teams is the lowest in the NBA, with the New York at 29th at 100.8 points per game, and Cleveland at 98.9. So that would, that does kind of make sense. So it is in line with it, but it is very low, right? Like, even like I feel like two bad teams that are bad at scoring are still going to score more against each other, if that makes sense. But at the same time, the under might actually be the play. So we're not here to make those types of judgments, just to display the information.
The other thing I wanted to note, Knicks are 5-7 against the spread on closing lines, and Knicks Cavs, neither of these are popular teams. They're in the bottom 10, the bottom 10 of pretty much any betting analytic you want to look at, as far as percentage of bets, percentage of money, number of bets. So it is a little bit surprising that they have received so many bets early on, because these early games usually aren't bet too much. And as of now, it's the second most popular bet game of the night, which is interesting to note. Fat Guy, on to the Mavs Bucks game. Bucks opened as 6-point favorites. They've been bet up to 7.5-point favorites at home. 1,210 bets on this game. 53% of the bets have been placed on the Bucks against the spread, and 69% of the money has helped push the Bucks up 1.5 points.
Yeah, that is interesting. It does make sense. That seems like a standard movement. But on the money line, the Bucks are pretty big favorites. So it would really be nice to have these handle numbers as far as spread market and money line, because it looks on the outset that they're taking exposure on a Mavs win, right? But a Mavs win would also mean a cover. So it depends on how those dollars line up exactly, right? Because a Mavs cover would be nice on one side, but a Mavs win would be bad on the other. So what would the net gain be in that result? So that's really what we'd like to know, but it's only something that we can infer by studying these markets day to day, and that is one of those interesting things. But it is pretty chalk as far as how the movement has been going. But I will say this for the money line, to give more evidence that the spread market is just by a factor of, at least 3 or 4 or 5 times, probably bigger, is the Bucks money line, despite only getting 52% of the money. And you're going to say, oh, they're getting more of the money. Yeah, but they're at bigger favorites, right? So if you have 50% of the money on a 2.5, 2.5 to 1 plus 250 dog, that's way worse if the dog comes in, right? Because think about this, the amount of money that you're going to get from the favorites. I mean, it's not going to pay off like the amount of money that you get from the dog. So anyways, that line moved from 227 to 286, and for the Bucks as heavier favorites. Whereas Mavs, is there a possibility that there could be value here? Because this is something we like to study. 247 to from 6 at minus 105 to plus 7.5 at minus 108. Is that the same as 200 to 247? That's interesting to note. And perhaps 247 plus 247 is a better bet than a higher variance bet than plus 7.5 minus 108. So, I mean, it could be congruent. I could be looking at this possibly wrong, but I'd imagine there's probably a few percent there. But again, that's all an inference, and it needs to be studied. And we're going to add to our data and come up with concrete numbers for the following year.
I want to just highlight what Fat Guy's talking about when it comes to the money line and the exposure that the books take, because essentially this is a 50-50 bet game money percentage-wise. And we're talking about the Mavs Bucks here, despite that these lines are here. So I'll highlight these 4 cells. So what Fat Guy is saying is, let's say there's $10,000 bet on both sides. If the Mavs win, the books have to pay out $24,000. If the Bucks win, the books have to pay out around $3,000. So that's a huge exposure on the Mavericks. It looks like a 50-50. This is an even split game, but the books are taking quite a bit of exposure by taking even money on the Mavericks in this game. So the best result for the books are for the Bucks to win by less than 6 is my guess. What would be the best result?
Yes, so that looks like
Bucks 1-5 win would be the best result for the books, and that's something that we like to keep in mind and take a look for and try to find those values and go with the books.
I would like to circle one more time though. So as he mentioned, that there is exposure on the Mavs technically there, but that to me highlights that because they don't have a huge appetite for risk. They don't. So that would mean to highlight that you could probably extrapolate that the Mavericks against the spread market is considerably bigger. We're trying to nail down how much bigger it usually is than the money line. We already know it's more popular, but if they're willing to take that exposure on the Mavericks, that means that that it's kind of like it's balancing a little bit because the Bucks are bet bigger against the spread. So we're trying to figure out like where that tipping point is. So if you do enough of these, you can kind of figure it out, like with the hold on spread in ratio against money line. So.
And then the OU for this game opened 227, bet up 1 point to 228. There is still juice, however, on the under, I should say, at minus 108 currently. 24% of bettors, 36% of the money is on the under. So all this stuff kind of lines up.
It does, and that's almost. I mean, it does. It is a move. The one thing though is how much is it a move? Again, it's a question we're always gonna. We're gonna be better to answer at the end of the season. Is 227 to 228, minus 106 to minus 102. I do think that's a move, but it's slight because you're dropping 4 points of juice.
And then also just to highlight on this, I hate to jump forward so much, but this Mavs Bucks, if you compare that to this Pelicans Lakers money line where the line's minus 460 to 84%, the books are really like this looks very lopsided, but this is equal exposure for this game, whereas compared to this
roughly,
game,
yes,
yeah,
it's not.
It's not. So on to the Grizzlies Timberwolves game, 605 bets. So not a lot of bets on this game early on. The T-Wolves were 3-point favorites to open up at home. But they have been bet down 1.5 points to minus 1.5, but at even juice currently on that line. 46% of bettors, but 97% on the money on the underlying Grizzlies, helping push that line down 1.5 points. And conversely, on the money line, Grizzlies open plus 132, bet down essentially to even, 18% of bets, but 93% of the money. So books taking a lot of early exposure on the Grizzlies in this, and they don't like that exposure, so they have moved that line down quite a bit.
So this one makes sense where like if you were going to make a play, I would imagine that the meat is off the bone for the Grizzlies. I mean, we don't know for sure, but it sure looks like it. So then because you remember, you're always betting a number, right? So I know we're talking about the betting market, but this is also betting philosophy. So if you've missed the boat on the Grizzlies, your only opportunity to bet the game would possibly be the Timberwolves. So then you have to, if you're handicapping, if you're doing market plays, you have to realize what is the number for the Timberwolves where it's positive expected value. So that's something I would keep an eye out for today. Because is it the price that we're currently being laid? I'm not sure, but perhaps it could be the one in the future. Because you always want to. It's like anything. Think about it. When you buy a stock, you want to buy low and you want to sell high. This is the same thing. Where can I buy the lowest on the Timberwolves? Would be the question you want to ask yourself. I would imagine going forward, because if you didn't jump on this Grizzlies early line, because think about it this way: 100. Plus 101 from plus 132. That's a 30% gap in equity. 30%. It's gone. It's gone. You can't really convince me that Grizzlies plus 101 is a good bet. So I'm not saying bet the Timberwolves. I'm saying ask yourself and do the math. Don't just blindly pick a team because you're betting numbers. What is the number where I could bet the Timberwolves and get positive expected value?
And then the OU for this game, open 224, bet up half a point to 224.5. We'll talk about the over because that's the way this moved. 58% of bets on the over. However, only 11% of the money on the over, despite this line moving up half a point.
We can't take this with the strongest of factors because it is one of the lowest bet games at 605. Somehow the Pelicans Lakers is lower, oddly enough. Anyways, that is an interesting move. I always wonder if they're just bracing themselves for a bunch of they're expecting Joe money on the over. But I don't know. The under does look like an attractive price to me from the outset. 224, that seems a little bit high. Minnesota's averaging 108.6 games per game, whereas the Memphis Grizzlies are averaging 106.5. So that's interesting to note, because if you add those two numbers together, even though this is the most menial of handicapping, that would be 114 points or 214.7, which is 10 points clear of what this OU is. So that is interesting. I'm sure there's other stylistic reasons for this, but just to give you a piece of note how it's a little bit weird. So anyways, it's something to keep a note on, is how the OU performs and the market does react to the half point maneuver and when the Joe money comes in.
Another thing I'll add to this OU market, Fat Guy brought up some interesting info. I'll also add on some stuff, but 54.5% of games have finished 224 or under on this season. So something else to keep in mind.
Interesting number.
Next up, we have the Bulls Thunder, 718 bets so far. The Thunder opened as 1-point favorites on the road, but they've been bet down to 1.5-point underdogs at home. 43% of bets on the Thunder, only 24% of the money. So it makes sense there why the line has moved in the Bulls' favor, because they have received 76% of the money on the spread. And then I'll also add in the money line. Bulls opened at a pick'em. They've been bet up to minus 111, 25% of bets on the Bulls. However, 63% of the money has been put on the Bulls money line. So money has strongly pushed the spread and the money line towards the Bulls.
That is interesting. And I got to say, though, like when you're looking at, say you're looking to take the Thunder, because clearly there was probably some positive EV at maybe Bulls even money to open. The Thunder, like, what would be better? 1.5 at minus 108, where the break-even win rate would have to be, I'm going to say 52% even.
Yeah.
Whereas to take the Thunder money line would be 49.5% to break even. So, like, is that gap so this is another question you're going to have to ask yourself. Is that 2.5% gap worth the 1.5 points? Because essentially you just, like, you get to win with 1 point. That's the only difference here. So like, is that worth 2.5%? See what I mean? Like, we're gonna start answering these small questions. And don't forget, you can take mass data, but you have to think in this scenario as well, right? Is that worth 2.5%? And that's not for us to answer. That's for you to think about and perhaps explore on your own. So this is a standard lateral market, but when you're choosing prices, I think that's always something to consider. What is better in this spot?
Well, Fat Guy, I do have an answer, but I'm going to hold back in this instance because it would be a blanket statement. It doesn't fairly predict what's going to happen with this specific market.
And some people got to do their own homework, Big Rye.
Some people do, or they could just join the membership, and I could easily tell
that
them
might be that might be an idea as well.
The OU for this game, it opened 225. It's been bet down to 224. 36% of bettors on the over. 97% of the money is on the over, despite this line moving down a point from 225 to 224.
I will say this, though. It does look dubious that 97% of the money, when I see that big of a thing, because don't forget, we get these numbers as far as bet percentage and money from a third market, right? Like a third party, rather. So, I mean, sometimes I'm dubious about the ones that are so lopsided, 97-3, because it'd be hard for that to happen, right? Yeah. Unless there's one super, because they don't even it can't even be one whale because they don't let you bet that much money in the early goings, right? So it'd be really, really hard for 36% to bet that much more than 64. So I can't put full faith into that figure there.
It also doesn't make sense for the line to move in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
I will say this, though, that the juice moved in favor of the over, even though the line pushed down a point. So this might not be much of a move at all. It might just be action from the books to try to encourage more action from players at home.
Something interesting, too, though, is the Bulls have been a really high-scoring team. Fifth highest scoring team in the NBA. Oklahoma City, unfortunately, the third lowest scoring team in the NBA. So maybe this is probably a balanced OU, considering the duality between high scoring and low scoring. But here's a good thing. If you're going to do a stack, then so what a stack is, you're going to do an over under on you're going to pick one team and the OU. So in all likelihood, this is another thing too. This is the only time parlays would be applicable. It's called parlays with correlation. Or covariance is another word. So Bulls and the over is more likely than Bulls and the under. Thunder and the under is more likely than Thunder and the over. So if you could parlay two events that are positively correlated, you could parlay Bulls and the over, Thunder and the under, and you would probably be profitable overall. Again, these are just ideas. This is not a promotion to do this or giving you license, but it is something to think about. And it's interesting how you think gambling, and never parlay unless it's positively correlated. And if you don't know what that means, go read about it.
Next up, we have the Hawks Jazz game, 832 bets. The Jazz open at 6-point favorites. They still are 6-point favorites, but the juice has favored them as 6-point favorites at home. 52% of bettors and 54% of the money is on the Jazz against the spread. And then I'll quickly do the money line. Minus 227 up to minus 231. 90% of bets and 60% of the money is on the Jazz. This is a pretty even market. This is like, I don't know if they've just done a really good job with this line, or there's just not a lot of meat on the bone that at least I see, Fat Guy. What do you think about it?
Yeah. The one thing I will say, though, is you did mention they did a really good job. I think that this is, the sportsbook we use is very heralded. I think doing a really good job is very easy for them, and they just choose to play these games that we try and understand and the other ones. This one, they decided to go pure chalk here. Is how do we balance the books? How do we make even money on both sides? And I kind of feel like this is the most defining example of that strategy of any of the games today.
And also interesting to note here, this is the most interesting OU one, and it opened at 223.5. It's been bet up to 227.5, but that line movement on the points has made the bet percentage and the money percentage fairly even as well. So it's kind of just reiterating. The only thing I would say out of all these three markets is the Hawks money line only has 10% of bets, but 40% of the money. So it makes me think that sharps do like the Hawks money line in this game, and because it hasn't moved quite that
Yeah.
much. There might be some meat on the bone there, but otherwise, altogether, I don't think there's a ton to talk about.
He's got a good point there, just because the duality of it, because perhaps they're getting a better price at that, which is a little bit weird considering, like, for instance, the Kings. I guess that's in line here. I can't make a comment on that. I'm going to say that it is pretty close. Just go to the over under, Big Rye.
Oh, I already talked about the OU market.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I had my head tilted. That's because I was looking at the Atlanta Hawks average score. So it's about 114 points, whereas Utah is about 110. So 224 in combined scores. And I mean, I guess maybe there's a philosophy that there's a possibility that 224 to 226 is maybe the most likely of numbers. So.
And then next up, we have the Pelicans-Lakers game. Only 567 bets so far, so I have a feeling that this line is very fresh. But everything here you kind of expect from a Lakers-type game. I'll just go through all three markets really fast, Fat Guy, and you can comment on whatever you'd like. Lakers open at -9.5. They've been bet up to -10. 30% of bettors on the Lakers. However, 74% of the money on the Lakers. Lakers money line, though, moved in the opposite direction, which is interesting to note. -496 down to -460. 38% of bettors on the Lakers. 84% of the money, though, is on the Lakers. And then for the OU, it opened at 218.5, bet up to 220. 69% of bets and 68% of the money is on the over for Pelicans Lakers.
Most interesting thing is that the inverse relationship between the money line and against the spread market in this game. I mean, Lakers becoming bigger favorites. I mean, you can't argue that 3 points of juice that they lose between -9.5 and -108 to -10, -105 is maybe making the line movement not as significant. But I mean, it did move -496 to -460, right? So that is interesting in its own right. It does look balanced, kind of, that market, like Big Rye had mentioned earlier, considering the money. I know, understand that most of the money's on the Lakers, but that's because it has to balance, because they are so much bigger favorites, right? Whereas Pelicans, you would need less of the money. Also, you got to think, if you were to like prices here, I would imagine that there's, again, you'd have to do your own homework or join the membership. There's probably a better price on the Lakers against the money line, despite having to risk a lot more to win a lot less. Whereas the Pelicans, perhaps it is a better bet to take the 10 points rather than the line, the money line, which looks to be negatively affected from 401 to 376. That was, if you were to consider both teams.
I'm going to interject here because the spread market came out about 5 or 6 minutes before the money line came out. So the Lakers opened at 9.5, but within the time until the money line came out, the Lakers were bet up to 10. So that 496 that the Lakers have is more Lakers -10 with even worse juice than they have right now.
Yeah, okay, that makes a little more sense.
Those make a little more sense, and that's something you guys would also want to follow, is when these lines come out, because not every open spread line and open money line is equal to each other. So just something interesting to follow along with, to kind of understand it. It shows you the importance, though, of knowing what the value is of betting a spread versus betting a money line, because there is micro value in being able to know which one is better over a long sample, and that could be the difference of like a 6% return on investment to like a 13% return on investment. Just understanding those things. Fat Guy, can you take the last game? It's going to be a second for me.
Absolutely. So the Clippers opened as 6.5 point favorites at -105, and they are currently -7 at even money, possibly a lateral movement. They went from they have 59% of the bets, 90% of the money. The Clippers also opened at -244 favorites, now bet up to -262, with just 19% of the betting public volume and 97% of the money, a dubious figure, I will admit. The OU opened at 230.5 at -110. It has currently been bet down to 227.5, -102, a large movement considering juice implications. Well, I mean, I guess still a large movement. There's 3 points and considerable juice, but juice the other way. Anyways, 46% of the volume, 34% of the money on the under, which does make that a reverse line movement. Or sorry, 34% of the money on the over. So that does make it a standard line movement.
And that is, do you want to add anything else to this game? I don't know if there's much else to talk about.
I'm wondering, like, the book's taking a lot of exposure on the Kings seemingly. So that's that's a point of interest. And then also too, how many people like the Clippers and the under? Do you know what I mean? Like, that's what makes me think like maybe there's more sharp action on the under, and then that under is positively correlated with the Kings. So perhaps there is value on the Kings at closing. So that's just something to keep in mind. I'm not suggesting doing that. I'm suggesting keeping an eye on it.
That's it for the NBA betting market video for January 15th. Good luck on your wagers today.